Tripp is tying this in with parents as God's agent. So for Tripp, it's not a power struggle between parent as authority and child. It is God-given, parent acting as God. So parent expecting the kind of obedience he believes God expects.
Page 136, he says, it is an issue between the child and God in which the parent is God's agent in drawing the child back within the circle of blessing.
I don't think this is theologically sound or biblically supportable, but even as it's presented here, the inevitable outcome is that there's no agency or free will. And I think that's revealing Tripp's maybe underlying belief about God, because if a child must always be drawn back into this circle of blessing by God's agents, there's no free will for the person to continue outside the circle of blessing. He's writing this book when his children are in high school and college, and says, we have not had a contest over the issue of submission for years. God is faithful to his promise. And I find that really fascinating, because you can see that as he reflects back, he looks through the lens, and Tripp doesn't pull on his own personal experience a lot, which is unusual. A lot of times popular Christian parenting experts are basically normalizing their experience for everyone, and it's quite clear in their writing. I think here we see a little glimpse that, oh, he is normalizing his experience, but he's not referencing a lot in his writing, because this has worked for Tripp. However he defines working, it includes, he hasn't had a power struggle or a conflict over submission with his teenage and young adult children. Therefore, this has worked, and he's going to attribute that to God's faithfulness. It would be fascinating to be able to talk to his adult children, reflecting back on that time, and see if they would agree or not agree, or I'm not sure. I think people who have grown up in these contexts where submission was expected from early age and instant compliance in all things was expected, the receipt usually does come due down the road later as they struggle to find adulthood and autonomy and personhood that's always been denied them. And it can be difficult to know their own desires, to make their own choices, because everything has been in this framework. Now, it does fit in really well with the nouthetic framework, because again, this is what nouthetic counseling would say. We are going to use the Bible to help you determine not your wants, your desires, your personality. Really, none of that factors into it. It's going to be this external goal that we've defined for you that you can put on and choose. And often it will be couched within the language of death to self and denying oneself, and pulling in some of that religious language that then, I don't know if it works out. I do think people kind of can stay cut off from those parts and not. And so I think as a parent can see that and think it's successful because I have compliant children, but that doesn't necessarily mean success, or that someone has developed or grown as a person or will be well equipped for adulthood. Tripp does go on to basically offer a plain prosperity gospel promise and say this will work out for families who follow this.
On page 140, he says, the result is children for whom it does go well. They are respected by their teachers. They are given special opportunities. They are esteemed by their peers in the Christian community. They grow in spiritual insight as they submit to God and walk in wisdom's path. Genuine submission to godly authority bears good fruit.
He's just going to make that claim. And to say children can have this on page 139 by submitting to mom and dad. And in doing that, they're submitting to God rather than themselves. So there's that language again, that die to self language. Submitting one's will to God is going to be mediated by parents as agents of God. So again, that agents of God, that mediator role, parents are saying, actually, it's me and my will that you are submitting to. And so it's fascinating that this gets woven in with the language of idolatry, because parents in many ways are being told to usurp the role of God in a child's life. One last thing from this chapter, because I posted this on Twitter and there was some interesting conversation about it, depending on how people read it, which way it went.
He says, it is so difficult to teach submission to authority in a culture in which we have few models to follow. At one time, adults provided examples of submission to authority. Mom submitted to dad as the head of the house. Dad submitted to his boss. There was a general concept of one's station in life and behaving in the manner appropriate to it. Various liberation movements in the second half of the 20th century have changed all that. Since our culture's interest in the equality and dignity of individuals is not rooted in Scripture, we have lost the idea of respect for a person because of his or her office or place of authority. Therefore, our children are growing up in a culture with no ready models of submission to authority.
When I first read that, I thought, is he saying that the idea of the equality and dignity of individuals is not rooted in Scripture? Or is he saying that because the culture cares about the equality and dignity of individuals but doesn't have a scriptural basis, it kind of doesn't count? Either way, I thought this was a really interesting statement to make, and revealed again his skepticism of culture, the way he's reacting to societal change and shifting acceptance of authority and particularly authority hierarchies, where you kind of accept the station given to you. So he's reacting to the resistance against that and suggesting that that kind of hierarchy is biblical in its roots. And so that is an argument I've heard before from complementarian theologians. So it did make me wonder how or if Tripp had been influenced by that, or part of those conversations, this elevating of hierarchy as a not just a way to organize society or a way to operate, but the way, the biblical way, and with very prescribed terms. Like, I don't know if you caught that mom submitting to dad in there as well. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Feel free to share your thoughts on the interpretation as you see it, if you like, and I'll post a screen grab of it here to close.